The War Within releases very soon. Pre-patch details and big dungeon changes coming. Let's see if Kalani can go ahead and summarize everything for us here as we head into the War Within, including some of the big changes coming in Mythic Plus, all the new affixes and everything else.
Hey folks, this is Kalani. The release date for the War Within expansion was just
get a release
revealed,
date for
and it's
pre-patch
coming a
too.
lot sooner than most folks are expecting. We also have some massive dungeon changes coming, which affect how you will progress through the different difficulties. Certain difficulties will not be available right away, and some dungeons won't be available depending on the difficulty you want to complete. There are also 4 new Mythic Plus affixes being introduced. A lot of affixes are being cut out,
All
and the
4
dev
punish
team's
tanks.
general design process for affixes has changed quite considerably. We'll also see dungeon and raid testing start up this week, so there's a lot to talk about. Now before we jump in, be sure to hit up that like button and subscribe so you never miss another video. Let's kick things off with that release date. The War Within will launch on August 26th, which is much earlier than a lot of folks were expecting. That gives us just over 2 months to get the rest of the beta testing out of the way, polish up...
Yeah, he hasn't said it yet, but I mean, given the 2 months and everything, I would say end of June. It has to be in July, pre-patch at this point. Right, we're going to get it at some point in July. That's the only thing that would make sense.
Various new systems and features, and make sure everything is ship-shape and ready to launch. That is not a lot of time, especially when you consider that the beta just and so started, so I guess it's crunch time when it comes to the testing cycle specifically. It also feels like this release date is being announced kind of early, which I am definitely a fan of. It gives us time to get everything lined up, get our end of expansion stuff wrapped up for Dragonflight, and we can start to make plans for the expansion launch. That's not the only new info we have. We also have a little roadmap for when other big milestones will happen surrounding the expansion's launch.
Yeah, and I talked about this. This roadmap essentially reveals the rest of the year, right? Because we know now that August 26th, the expansion is going to launch. Before that, July, we're going to get pre-patch at some point. And then this right here takes us all the way through Season 1's launch in September 10th. And then, of course, we know the last thing on the current roadmap for 2024 was the anniversary event, which has to happen in late November, right? Based on, the anniversary of World of Warcraft. So once we get that, I mean, we're going straight into the Christmas holiday events and everything, and that's the end of the year. So now we know basically what the rest of the year is going to look like, thanks to this little secondary roadmap.
So obviously we're currently in beta, then the early access for the expansion starts up on August 22nd, so that's when the pre-order folk get to play, which still feels a bit weird, seeing a good chunk of the player base head over to Dawn while everyone else has to stay behind. Definitely isn't going to feel great, especially in an MMO. It's also worth noting that this will be 4 days head start, not the 3 days that was previously advertised, so the early access folks get in even earlier. Now the real launch is set for August 26th, and then we already have a date for Season 1 of the War Within as well. That will kick off on September 10th. So that gives us 2 weeks at the start of the expansion to get leveled up, maybe get some alts ready, get some initial gear under our belts, and get all of our ducks in a row before we head into the new season, which is when we'll find the new raid, the Mythic dungeon system, and of course rated PvP.
Of course.
Curiously, we don't have any information about pre-patch just yet that I have seen. I would have expected it to line up somewhat with the Mists of Pandaria event ending, but the remix event runs until August 19th, which is just before the early access for the War Within begins.
Yeah, so there's no way they're going to launch pre-patch that week. I said this before, and people were really upset about it. They were like, but I want to remix my characters, right? I want to be able to play my remix characters in the pre-patch, and here's the thing. Pre-patch ain't that big of a deal, guys. I mean, if you get... you're going to get your remix characters on the 19th. I bet you can do all the pre-patch content that next week, right? Even in 2 days if you're really dedicated. And Blizzard just announced the other day that all of the pre-patch currencies will be warband bound. So you'll be able to basically do all the pre-patch content on your current retail characters and then transfer that currency around to whichever remix characters you end up transferring over to the War Within, and use that currency to buy all the gear that you may have missed out on because you were still stuck in Pandaria. So there's no worries about it. The currency exchange basically solves that problem.
So if you can't transfer these characters over to retail before the event ends, you won't actually get to play any of them for the vast majority of the pre-patch event. You'll only get maybe 2 to 3 days, assuming that you're going into early access, and that's also assuming the whole process of turning the time running characters into standard characters goes smoothly. Typically, the pre-patch would run for 2 to 6 weeks, depending on how large the events are going to be. 4 weeks has been a good
Honestly, it's 4 weeks is what I bet when I talked about it. When I was trying to get the launch date down, and remember when I told you August 27th because I picked a Tuesday. 26th is the launch day. I was obviously right, but 4 weeks is probably right, and that's why I'm saying it'll launch in July. Based on we're getting, we're just getting really these like awakening, these dreams or whatever the hell. They're not dreams. They're like memories. That's what they're calling them. These basically memories that spawn in different places like Northrend and Eastern Kingdoms, all that shit. It's nothing huge. So I'm not expecting it to last 6 weeks. That would be quite excessive.
Middle ground for most pre-patches, so that's going to be a pretty safe bet. That would mean that pre-patch is just over a month away though, so that's going to arrive before you know it. So we will very quickly be moving into pre-patch and the next expansion. 2 months is not
days.
a long time at all. That's definitely going to fly by, so I guess the big question is, will the expansion be ready in time? Beta testing only just started, and there are some big changes still happening every week. For example, there are some huge changes coming to the dungeon system. There are 4 new affixes for the Mythic Plus Keystone pool, a lot of affixes were removed, and we have a clearer picture of which difficulties will become available and when. So we know that the huge Season 4 dungeon changes will be carried forward into the War Within. Normal dungeons will remain more or less unchanged, and the 8 War Within dungeons will always be available on normal difficulty. But Heroic mode got bumped up quite a bit. It remains queuable content, but its difficulty and rewards were increased. The new part here is that heroic dungeons will be tied to the seasonal rotation.
So that's fine. Now heroic basically is your Mythic 0 without a timer, so people can dip their toe in and learn how to. I think this was a good change. Heroic had kind of lost its. There was no point to it anymore. It was something that people skipped. They just went to Mythic 0. So this was a good thing for heroic.
You may only be able to queue into the currently active seasonal dungeons instead of the 8 War Within dungeons. That's an interesting change and could help you better prepare for Mythic and Mythic Plus versions of those same dungeons. But this could mean that we'll have to wait to play half of the War Within dungeons on heroic difficulty until a future season where they'll be in a seasonal rotation. Now, the post specifically mentions that Mythic dungeons will not be available until Season 1 begins, but Heroic didn't have that same disclaimer. That might mean that we can complete Heroic dungeons before Season 1 starts, even though we have previously seen information that hints towards the Heroic dungeon queue not being available.
I don't think so. The whole thing, basically the thing that's been quelling the anger towards the early access is Blizzard's been saying, well, there's going to be basically no way for them to start gearing out. Like, it's just going to be a leveling thing. If people want to level up, they can do that early. But as far as gathering gear, you're not going to fall behind because the season's not going to start yet. So making heroic dungeons available kind of would give them a head start. So I don't think that's going to happen.
Before the start of Season 1, so we're going to have to wait and see how that ends up working exactly. The other important change here is that Mythic dungeons will be changing from a weekly lockout to a daily lockout, which is a massive shift in how much gear will be available from Mythic dungeons early on. You'll be able to run Mythic dungeons 7 times more often. That will give everyone more opportunities to gear up and get the pieces of gear that they want from Mythic dungeons without having to step up into the Mythic Plus Keystone system. Nice. We also have confirmation of the Season 1 dungeon pool. These dungeons were previously data mined, but I think this is the first official post, if I remember correctly. So we'll be delving into the Stone Vault, the Dawnbreaker, the City of Echoes, and the City of Threads. Those are the 4 War Within dungeons that we start with in the first season. Those will be joined by the Grim Batol, the Necrotic Wake, the Mist of Tierna Scythe, and the Siege of Borealis.
By the way, Siege of Borealis was confirmed this morning. Blizzard released a blue post saying that whether you're Horde or Alliance, you are going to be running the Alliance version of the dungeon if you're running it in Mythic version. So anything Mythic Plus, you're going to be running the Alliance version of it, which is interesting. Maybe the Alliance has an advantage because they know that path better.
Some interesting picks in there.
The advantage will last like one day.
That weren't too long ago, but it's a decent lineup nonetheless. If you didn't play throughout Dragonflight, this is exactly how the first season went there, where we don't actually get all 8 new dungeons in the first season of the expansion. So we'll get 4 of them now, and then probably the other 4 will be seen in Season 2. Now, I will be very interested to see how Covenant and special items and abilities work in some of those dungeons, because not everyone is going to have played through Shadowlands and either have a Covenant unlocked and selected, or understand how those effects actually work. As for the Mythic Plus system, we are going to see 4 new affixes. All of these affixes will be in the +4 affix bucket,
affixes,
so you'll see them when your keystone gets to +4 or above, and they are designed a little differently when compared to other affixes.
Yeah.
The dev team want them to be more passive effects, so they don't contribute to additional cognitive load on players during trash combat, and they want them to provide an advantage.
Sure, the only cognitive load they're causing is additional load on the freaking tank. Basically, these things are going to work with either you're going to have weeks where the mana, where mobs that use mana are empowered, and then you're going to have weeks where other mobs that don't use mana are empowered. And whichever one is empowered, their abilities essentially hurt the tank more. Every time. It freaking sucks for the tanks, which in turn probably is going to suck for healers.
Damage profiles each week and
DPS can just
you
DPS,
might approach
and I have
them
to think.
in terms of talents, gearing options, and consumables. They are definitely interesting, so let's quickly go through them. Reckless causes non-boss enemies without mana to ignore 20% of armor with their attacks, but their armor is also reduced by 30%, and they take 10% increased arcane damage.
Yeah, so that's nice for mages, right? They're going to get a nice little buff to their arcane damage against the mobs, and their armor is reduced, which is good for the rest of DPS. But who's the one that's paying the price for that little, kiss after the curse? Well, 20% of armor ignored. Whose armor are they freaking ignoring? The tanks. Gonna get bitch slapped.
Damage. So they will deal more damage, especially to your tanks, but they take more physical damage specifically due to that lower armor and arcane damage as well. Thorned causes non-boss enemies without mana to inflict damage to their attackers when attacked, so a basic Thorns effect, and they also take 10% increased Holy and
Yeah, and who's the one attacking them? Who's the one that has aggro on them? Well, it's, physical damage to the tank. 10% increased Holy and Shadow damage, that's nice for warlocks, for priests, for paladins. Am I missing one? Maybe demon hunters. Do demon hunters do shadow damage? Yeah, maybe. So that'll be the week that they're above. Basically, Blizzard's trying to rotate the meta around. So there's no seasonal meta. It's weta. It's like a weekly meta now.
Shadow damage. A
weta,
Thorns effect could be interesting. I guess it would depend on how it is handled and how much damage it does. If you reflect damage based upon damage dealt, that's going to be very tedious and very unfun.
True.
You wouldn't ever really be able to use big bursty cooldowns because you would just die to your own reflect damage. But if it's a small amount of steady damage, then that just kind of gives your healers more stress to worry about. The increased Holy and Shadow damage is a bit odd because that only applies to a very limited handful of classes or specs.
Yep.
Attuned gives non-boss enemies with mana a 20% magic damage buff, but they take 10% increased damage from nature effects and 30% increased damage from bleeds.
Okay, so there you go. Nature, you're going to have a very nice thing for druids that week, maybe shamans, and then increased bleed effects. You're going to have good stuff for rogues, demon hunters again. That's good for them. 20% increased magic damage. Well, as a blood DK, I'll be using anti-magic shield and shell a lot, I guess, that week. But who's the increased magic damage against for the most part? Whoever's being targeted. Who are they targeting? The tank. Yep, another one.
This is probably the least interesting one to me. It just makes caster mobs deal more damage, which could end up being a massive problem if the caster mobs are mini-bosses and cannot be interrupted, or there's a large amount of AoE damage that suddenly just hits like a truck.
Imagine the week where Reckless happens, 20% of the armor is ignored, and then you got bolstering on top of that. Oh, man. DP
and then Focused gives non-boss enemies with mana, so basically casters, a 30% haste buff, but they take 10% increased fire and frost damage.
Yeah, fire and frost damage also nice for, again, mages, again, shamans. Mages are going to be pretty good, I think, next season. Or they're going to have a good time. And then the increased damage, what was it? Increased haste. Well, yeah, haste increases casting and things like that. And who are they casting on? The tank, so
increased fire and frost damage. These are all basically passive kiss curse effects. Something gets harder, something gets easier. They're actually pretty good in terms of general design.
The healer has to deal with it, not you.
But they have some major flaws as they are.
No, the healer is going to heal me, but I'm the one who's going to have to constantly make sure I'm ignoring the correct damage, mitigating as much damage as possible. Yeah.
All right, now, to start
only a
with,
shitty tank will just put it all on the healer.
Ambiguous about which enemies will benefit from the curse effects. Just mana or non-mana non-boss enemies assumes every trash mob will be affected one way or another, but that's going to be drastically different depending on the dungeon and its trash. Some affixes could make one dungeon super hard while it barely changes another one, so there's some potential for large swings in difficulty here week to week. But while everyone will have to deal with the curse effect, only a handful of classes or specs will benefit from the kiss
buff,
effect for any given week. Increased nature damage or bleed damage is quite niche, increased holy damage or shadow damage, or increased frost damage or fire damage. It's all very specific. The intent here is apparently to give different classes or specs a boost as the weeks and affixes change, so everyone
meta.
gets a time to shine.
I just called it by accident. I call it the weta. That's what it is. It's the weekly meta.
But I think this creates two problems by itself. The buffs aren't equally representative, so some classes or specs will benefit more, and
That's
I don't
by
think
design,
you can
I
really
think.
balance this in its current state. Some classes or specs actually benefit from every single buff thanks to chaos damage. Chaos damage can be comprised of
I
up
didn't even
to
think about
7
that.
different schools of magic, so demon hunters or warlocks
Wow.
could double dip into some of these buffs and benefit from
damn.
almost every week, while other classes only get 1 week to shine, and even then it might not be a good damage
Oh, so demon hunters are going to be amazing again? Surprise. Blizzard loves demon
profile
hunters.
for that class. And then for any week
I didn't even
with a
think
given
about
buff,
that.
classes or specs that do benefit will likely be favoured, potentially causing even more flavour of the month and meta chasing problems. Imagine getting denied from keys during a week because you don't deal bleed
It's not
damage.
the week for you,
Sure,
yeah.
maybe some specs or classes can spec or talent differently to get some extra bleed damage, but if those talents aren't optimal or well balanced or play in a way that you enjoy, that's not going to feel great either. I think affixes like this could work, but I would change both the curse and kiss effects to just be more general. Like for the haste one, increase the haste of all trash mobs, sure, but also increase the haste of players by the same amount. Everyone benefits, it makes things a bit different, and could make...
Right, the community has been asking for like more kiss curse based stuff. I mean, I feel like the best kiss curse they've ever done for dungeon for Mythic Plus was the Dreadlord stuff. You guys remember we talked about it the other day where they used to have that one undercover Dreadlord in the dungeon, and you would go kill him, and if you killed him, the whole group got a buff. Like, that was cool. That was a nice one. This one, basically, the one that's dealing with the curse is not getting the kiss. It's very weird. Like, a tank is dealing with reduced armor, but then they're not getting any benefit from it. It's the mage who's getting the benefit of the arcane damage increase. Like, what the hell? Now, the best one was Corruption. Yeah, Corruption gear was another good example of that, but that wasn't a Mythic affix. I'm just talking about Mythic affix. But yes, Corruption gear was great, right? You had to balance out, dealing with the additional problems that add more Corruption armor caused, but then you got the buff. So if you could deal with it, you got a very nice buff out
for a
of it.
more enjoyable dungeon experience. I hope these affixes see some iteration before the expansion goes live, because there is a lot of potential to tap into here. This first round of options just don't seem to be that great. Now, in addition to those affixes, a lot of other ones have been removed. Afflicted, Incorporeal, Entangling, Storming, and Volcanic were all tossed out, so we won't see any
I was
of them.
sad to see Entangling go. I actually thought that was the best one of them all. I liked it. It was very easy to deal with. It was visually very sound. You didn't need add-ons or anything to understand what was going on. It was a vine and a circle, and you had to pull the vine out of the circle. I don't know why they got rid of it. They kept
during
freaking
season
bolstering.
1 of The War Within. And then to line up with the 4
Sanguine,
affixes in
Jesus
the +4
Christ,
bucket,
man.
the +7 affix bucket was cut down to just 4 affixes as
made these
well. So
decisions?
we'll have Raging, Bolstering, Bursting, and Sanguine, which are arguably the least light
worst.
affixes out of the entire roster. So we'll only have 4 different affixes in each pool or
Well,
bucket.
I guess you could still say they're listening to community feedback, right? They did listen to the feedback. All they did was act in the wrong direction on it. They took a list of what's your least favorite affix. Oh, thanks for the feedback. We're going to give you the 4 that you put at the bottom. Here you go.
The new affixes are kind of weird, and
Jesus.
the +7 affixes are the ones that people hate.
+7's going to get
not
wrecked.
a great setup as we head into the new expansion. The good news here is that there is still time to provide feedback on this stuff, so we'll see how testing goes and hope the dev team has enough time to actually respond to the community
By the way, they moved up the myth track crests and shit like that. It's not +6 anymore. I believe it's +8 or 9 now that you're going to have to do to get a myth track crest.
reception. Dungeon testing will start up this week on Thursday,
9.
June 13th, and it will be available
Enjoy,
until
guys,
Tuesday,
enjoy.
so it's really only open for the weekend at this point, which again isn't super ideal. I know that they've liked doing these short windows of testing time for Dungeons and Mythic Plus in previous alpha and beta builds, and even in PTRs throughout Dragonflight, but the short windows do make it hard to get a good idea of how everything works together. Usually, the testing also allows you to craft a keystone however you want, including adding whatever affixes you want to test and setting the keystone level. But oddly enough, this also allowed you to test a keystone with 0 affixes, which a lot of folks like to do just so they can see how the dungeon plays and works without needing to worry about actual affixes getting in the way. It seems like that might change for this test. The blue post also says that the affixes will rotate daily to expedite their testing, so I guess each of the new affixes will have 1 day of testing before
that's still ongoing right now.
Next. There is a note that we will be able to customize keystones somewhat down at the bottom, so here's hoping you cannot remove the affixes this time to ensure that they actually get some testing, so proper feedback can be provided and evaluated. That's not the only major endgame testing starting up this week. Raid testing also starts on the same Thursday. Initially, this testing schedule was very compacted, testing the entire raid's worth of bosses on Heroic in 1 week, and then everything on Mythic the week after that, but the dev team may have thought that was too much, because they've updated the schedule quite quickly to spread things out. The raid is going to have 8 bosses, and as with every raid in Dragonflight, we will not see the final boss in any kind of public testing to keep that fight a bit of a secret and a surprise for when raiders get there in the actual expansion, which I still think is a great idea and was done very well throughout Dragonflight.
Yeah, I think it's good.
It meant we always had something new and exciting waiting for us at the end, and made the races to World First more interesting in my opinion. So on June 13th, we'll see the first raid bosses come up for testing. We'll see 2 bosses on that Thursday. On Friday, we'll see 3 bosses get tested on Heroic mode. And then 2 weeks after that, on June 27th, the last 2 Heroic bosses will get tested. And on the Friday after, the first 3 Mythic bosses will get tested. And then the raid will open up for normal testing across that weekend.
Nice.
There's another 2-week gap until July 10th.
Oh my, I haven't seen this dungeon journal. Queen Enserek has so many mobs. Holy crap. This is going to be like a very intensive fight. Look at all these damn mobs. Holy crap. All of these are part of this single fight.
Which is a Wednesday where 2 more Mythic bosses additional get tested, mobs besides and her. The last 2 Mythic bosses are on that Thursday, and then both Raid Finder Wings open up for testing on that Friday. So that's a lot more spread out than it initially was, which should hopefully mean better quality testing overall. As always, this schedule will be subject to change depending on whether or not the bosses are ready to test and how the beta is behaving in that particular week. So if you're interested in raid testing, keep your eyes peeled for scheduled updates.
Nice.
But that's when the War Within expansion is scheduled to release, when the early access will start up, when we can expect pre-patch and some new testing opportunities coming soon. Do you think the expansion will be ready in August? What are you most worried about?
I think it'll be ready.
How do you feel about only having 2 months of testing before this ship?
By ready, I mean available. We'll have to see. I still feel like they're balancing out hero talents and everything else. I don't know if that's going to be completely done yet, but since when has Blizzard not rebalanced classes constantly throughout an expansion? That's not new. So we'll see. But in terms of like the core, of the expansion, yeah, I think it'll be ready.
Sail. Leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon and to all of our members here on YouTube.
Think that?
You can see the names floating by on screen. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can find links in the description or click the join button just below this video. If you enjoyed the video or found it useful in any way, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you're always kept up to date. Thanks for watching, folks.
Thank you.
And have fun. And as always, I will see you next time.
Yeah, great video. Great video, nice stuff. Most likely, we're going to get that pre-patch end of July. That's what I'm expecting. We'll have it for leading up to the War Within. And then, like I said, remix characters, all that. You'll be joining us towards the end of it. You'll have plenty of time, and you can throw your currencies around and everything else. Will it be ready? Has to be. Has to be. That's all I have to say. So we'll see. Great video from Kalani.